Breaking tonight, a terrifying rock slide in Alberta's Banff National Park.
I was just yelling at her to go, 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 we need to run.
Hikers on a popular trail caught off guard when a rock face suddenly gave way. The latest from the scene. Will the U.S. attack Iran? Donald Trump says he needs up to 2 weeks to decide.
President Trump will do what's best for America. I trust his judgment.
Iran bombs an Israeli hospital. Israel threatens Iran's supreme leader as the world scrambles to de-escalate. An explosive setback for SpaceX. The moment the uncrewed Starship rocket burst into flames.
This is unreal. This shouldn't be happening.
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Thanks for joining us. Adrian is away. We begin with breaking news out of Alberta. At least one person is dead and 3 are injured after a rock slide in Banff National Park. New video shows us the aftermath of the slide onto a trail popular with hikers. It happened north of Lake Louise, along a trail in the Bow Lake and Bow Glacier Falls area. This is the before photo taken by a witness, and this is the after with an entire rock shelf gone. This witness says he and his wife initially heard a smaller rock fall. A few minutes later, they had to sprint for their lives.
I turned around and I see basically a whole shelf of a mountain come loose. People weren't even reacting, and people kept taking selfies and stuff, and both of us were taking it as a warning sign to at least keep further away from the mountainside so we have time to move away if anything happens. I was just yelling at her to go, 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 we need to run. And yeah, luckily we got out.
Local fire crews, RCMP, and medevac helicopters are responding. Acton Clarkin is near the scene. Acton, what have you learned?
Erica, in a joint statement, RCMP and Parks Canada say one person was found deceased at the scene. 2 others were transported to hospital by air ambulance. Another was transported to a hospital by a regular ground ambulance. We don't know much about their conditions, but we do know it happened on a trail near here. This is Bow Lake behind me. There are lots of popular hiking trails in the area. It's easy to access. Right in front of me is the Icefields Parkway, a popular highway full of tourists and locals throughout the day, throughout the night. And let's hear from one man who witnessed this rockfall.
To me, it looked like at least 50 meters wide and at least 10 meters deep. Just really, really house-sized piece of rock coming loose. I've seen smaller flakes come loose, but nothing that's meters deep. It was just my wife thought that the whole mountainside was coming loose and that it was kind of pointless to run because she thought that the lake would come down.
About 1 kilometer north up the highway from here, there was a site full of officials, RCMP, Parks Canada, medical, first responders. We tried to go up the road to see if we could speak to anyone or get a closer look at what they were planning. A parks warden told us to turn back. The area was closed off. But from this point here, throughout the evening, we have been seeing helicopters taking off, going into the mountains, some returning. It's tough to get information out here, but an EMS first responder who stopped by the side of the road recently told me that site would be closing down for the evening. It's getting a bit dark and it's tough to get information in and out of here. We're only able to bring this to you because we brought a satellite truck, but there's very poor cell service and there's poor radio receptions. That's what the EMS person told me. But officials do say that searching will continue in the morning for any potential hikers who are potentially still missing. We're not sure if that's the case or not, but we do know drones and dogs will be involved. There's still lots more to come on this story.
All right, thanks for this. Acton Clarkin in Banff National Park. Turning now to the Middle East, a week after Israel's surprise attack on Iran, with both sides trading wave after wave of strikes, Donald Trump is still weighing whether to bring the U.S. into the war. The White House says a decision will come within 2 weeks to give time for diplomacy to work. But there's no hint of peace. Some Iranian missiles getting past Israeli air defenses, destroying apartments, sending people scrambling, and hitting a hospital, prompting vows that Iran's leadership will pay a price. Margaret Evans shows us for many in the region, including in Iran itself, escalation seems inevitable.
The long reach of Tehran finding its way through Israeli defenses again. Direct hits landing with the power to destroy. Here in the central city of Ramat Gan and at a hospital in Beersheba in the south. The point of impact, a department whose patients had been moved to shelters. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu toured the site, waiting along with the rest of the world to see if the United States will join Israeli efforts to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities.
President Trump will do what's best for America. I trust his judgment.
Israel isn't waiting for Washington. Its fighter pilots again hitting targets across Iran. These pictures on state television showing a hit on the Iraq nuclear facility. Residents in Tehran are still fleeing the capital, including this man who asked not to be identified for his own security. So far, the Islamic Republic is trying to control the situation, he says. But honestly, you have to see Tehran. I've never seen it like this. Everyone sees regime change as Israel's real target. I hope it happens. Iran's ambassador to the UN in Geneva insists Iranians are rallying around the flag.
Nowadays, you can observe a great solidarity in our country.
Ali Bahraini denies U.S. claims that Iran wants to send a delegation to Washington, pointing out they'd already been negotiating. Bahraini says if the U.S. does send its planes to assist Israel, all bets are off.
If the United States cross that red line, then our military forces will respond very firmly to those involvements.
It's not clear, Erica, how seriously Washington will take that threat, but it will certainly raise fears here in the region of a wider war.
And Margaret, there continues to be a lot of talk about Israeli hopes for regime change.
That's right. The official line is that it's not a war aim, but that it could still be a consequence of the war. That said, the Israeli defense minister was very clear when he said that Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, cannot continue to exist.
Thanks for this. Margaret Evans in Jerusalem. The White House is signaling it isn't ready to enter the fray yet. Sam Sampson shows us Donald Trump's dilemma, caught between the pressures and perils of a widening Middle East war.
U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to go to war in Iran now has a deadline.
Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. That's a quote directly from the president.
Israel says Tehran is almost ready to build a nuclear weapon, so it's been hitting Iranian nuclear and military sites for a week. But to reach Iran's deepest nuclear site, Israel needs the U.S., which has specialized 30,000-pound bombs carried by these B-2 stealth bombers.
It is the only weapon in anyone's arsenal globally that's able to successfully target and potentially even eliminate facilities like Fordo. It was designed originally with the intent of attacking and destroying targets specifically built into mountains.
But for Trump, getting more involved in this war is politically tricky.
His MAGA base is split pretty much down the middle on this issue. Probably the majority, the isolationist majority, opposes any sort of intervention in the Middle East and getting bogged down in another war.
Then there are the risks of conflict itself.
Could a fighter get taken out while escorting? Could the Iranians lash out at U.S. bases, U.S. partners in the region, go after oil fields? Could they close the Strait of Hormuz? There's a lot of cons here.
We might end up not being able to destroy the facility. That would cause an even worse crisis because then the U.S. would be engaged in combat without any real end state.
It's unclear if Trump's 2-week deadline is rigid. He's used that time frame for other negotiations like tariffs and peace talks with Ukraine, and often it gets extended or it passes without incident. Now, some experts say if Israel sees Trump drag his feet on this, it could decide to escalate things on its own. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Washington.
The federal government is now organizing commercial flights out of some neighboring countries for Canadians inside Israel and Iran who want to leave the region. But as Rafi Boudjikanian explains, first they need to get themselves across a border.
When this Canadian couple traveled to Iran, they were hoping to make happy memories. Our wedding was going to be tonight, she said. Instead of a trip down the aisle, they ran for the border like thousands of others, fleeing a country at war with Israel. They made it to Armenia. We will wait and then we will return to Iran to get married, he said. He may need some patience. Israel and Iran have been exchanging missile fire for a week. Airspace shut down in both. Ottawa is urging Canadians in the region to get out, booking commercial flight options out of neighboring countries, Turkey or Armenia to Iran's north, Jordan to the east of Israel and the West Bank. A Canadian official tells CBC News passengers will likely have to reimburse at least part of the cost.
There's been zero communication with my mother-in-law for over 48 hours now. And unless internet goes back to normal, there's no way we can get in touch with her.
Pega Salari wants her elderly relatives visiting Iran to stay put instead of trying a long and dangerous drive to the border.
Right now, especially with that age group, the only thing you want is for them to remain safe until things settle down.
In Israel, some Canadians are choosing to wait for the airspace to reopen, like this Toronto man who was visiting family.
So we've had to take shelter many times. You get an alarm to your phone, and then about 2 minutes later, you get another one that kind of tells you what areas. And if it's in your area, you hear the siren, you got to book it to the safe room.
Global Affairs Canada says there are more than 10,000 Canadians in the affected region, and there is no sense of how much longer hostilities could last. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
There are a lot of unanswered questions tonight about a Quebec toddler found alive after being missing for 4 days. As Sarah Levitt tells us, sources say the little girl likely spent the whole time outside alone.
An improbable but incredible ending to a desperate search. A 3-year-old girl found alive next to this highway, missing for nearly 4 days.
It's the best feeling, and the best ending for a search that we could possibly have hoped for.
But how did she survive? CBC News is no longer naming or showing the girl to protect her identity now that she's safe. Sources tell Radio-Canada the toddler was dehydrated and covered in bug bites when she was found and said she was waiting for her mom. She didn't have food with her. The lunchbox, initially thought to be hers, actually belonged to one of the officers who found her and gave her a snack. Sources say she likely spent the entire time outside on her own. The last few days have been like reliving 2020, says Amélie Lemieux. Her 2 daughters were abducted and killed by their father, who then took his life. Then an Amber Alert was sent out. Lemieux is one of the many saying there should have been one for the 3-year-old. I think the criteria to launch an Amber Alert is too strict and needs to be revised, she says. Police in Quebec launch an alert if a child under 18 is abducted, in danger of serious injury or death, and if they have a description of the means of transportation, child, and suspect. Police say this incident didn't meet the bar.
We didn't have an abduction, so that's the first criteria that's not there. The second criteria is we need to have something to follow through. Do we have a vehicle?
According to police, around 9,000 kids under 18 go missing every year in Quebec. They say an alert every time would result in public fatigue. The child's mother, 34-year-old Rachel Ella Todd, was charged with child abandonment. She may be the one person with some answers, but has told police she can't remember anything. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
There is now a reward on offer for any information on the whereabouts of 2 missing children in Nova Scotia.
This has been such a tragic event that's impacted the community and families and has caught the attention of Nova Scotians and people across the world. We've been asked by the RCMP to include this case in the program.
Siblings Lily and Jack Sullivan were reported missing from their rural Pictou County home on May 2nd. The money comes from a provincial program used to help in unsolved crimes, but the province says that does not necessarily mean a crime was committed in this case. Ottawa is moving to limit foreign steel imports as it works to protect industries hit hard by Donald Trump's tariffs. As Ashley Burke explains, it's also setting a date for when it could hike counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum.
Back from talks with Donald Trump,
it's a negotiation right now.
The Prime Minister has a 30-day deadline to broker a deal, but is under pressure to act now.
The government is responding to the impact of the unjust U.S. tariffs with multiple tools.
Mark Carney announcing new measures to prop up the aluminum and steel industries, hit hard by Trump's tariffs, now at 50%. So the government is putting limits on steel imports from countries that don't have a trade deal with Canada.
A quota for the amount of steel that can come in from third countries to limit that amount to stabilize the market.
Some foreign steel imports will be allowed, but anything above the limit will be slapped with a big tariff, making it very expensive. The goal to get companies to buy more Canadian steel.
What I'm missing from the plan right now is how are the consumers helped.
Carney also announced if there's no deal with the White House by July 21st, he could hike his retaliatory tariffs.
The fact that there's now a deadline set by the two leaders, I think, has focused the conversation, so I'm optimistic.
But the aluminum industry says it wants matching counter tariffs immediately.
The market cannot bear a 50% increase like this. So 30 days at 50%, it's a long walk in the desert.
Ontario's premier says the government must protect local manufacturers.
I do have the confidence in the Prime Minister and his team to move forward with these negotiations.
The Prime Minister is expected to meet with premiers on Friday to talk about this new program and the next steps.
And Ashley, what else do we know about how this quota will work?
Well, Erica, there are a series of countries accused of selling steel below market value or getting unfair government support that aren't impacted by it. For example, the CBSA right now is investigating South Korea and Vietnam over allegations that they're dumping steel in Canada, subsidized by China, but neither country will be impacted by these quotas because they have trade agreements with Canada. The Canadian Steel Producers Association issued a brief statement saying the government's announcements fall short of what the industry needs.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Ashley Burke in Ottawa. This announcement comes hot on the heels of Mark Carney hosting the G7. Rosie and the At Issue panel will join us a little later to take a hard look at whether it was a success for Canada. There's a new push to expand Canada's airline industry and allow more foreign players.
It's not free money. There's a price to pay for that investment.
The potential impact on your airfare and why some experts aren't convinced. A SpaceX rocket explodes during a routine test.
Oh my goodness.
We're back in 2. For a third time, Donald Trump is giving TikTok's Chinese parent company 90 more days to sell off control of its U.S. operations and avoid a ban on the app based on security concerns around China accessing user data. Democrats and even some Trump supporters say the president can't keep delaying a ban Congress passed and the Supreme Court confirmed. Canada Post has reached a deal with the second largest union representing its workers. 8,500 people are part of the Canadian Postmasters and Assistants Association, most of whom manage post offices in rural communities. Their new agreement includes an 11% wage increase over 3 years, retroactive to January. Canada Post still hasn't reached a deal with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers after sending its final offer last month. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is apologizing for comments he made about First Nations. He said they, quote, come hat in hand to the government for money. As Mike Crawley explains, it comes as Indigenous leaders push back against a controversial bill.
Chiefs of the Anishinaabe Nation arrived to meet Ontario's Premier.
one day after Doug Ford lashed out at First Nations leaders who oppose his Bill 5.
You can't just keep coming hat in hand all the time to the government. You got to be able to take care of yourselves.
Ontario can be a critical mineral superpower.
The bill is Ford's plan to fast-track major projects such as mines, hyped in this new promotional video.
Bold new legislation that will unleash our economic potential by cutting red tape.
But Ford's push to get First Nations on board with his plan got derailed by his comments.
Troubling, but also racist. As First Nations, you know, we are not beggars.
Shows his ignorance and just the disrespect.
Paints us out to be these like mooching, begging, like exploitative sort of people.
Emerging from his meeting with the chiefs, Ford was contrite.
I just want to say I sincerely apologize for my words, not only if it hurt all the chiefs in that room, but all First Nations.
Standing with the Grand Council chief of the Anishinaabe Nation and her deputy, Ford tried to explain his choice of words.
I get passionate because I want prosperity for their communities.
First Nations leaders present accepted Ford's apology, but said they're far from ready to embrace his plans to fast-track mining in Ontario.
Our chiefs felt today that the apology was sincere. Our First Nations within the Anishinaabe Nation remain opposed to Bill 5.
Doug Ford's Bill 5 has a lot in common with the federal government's proposed Bill C5. That legislation would give Ottawa sweeping powers to greenlight projects of national interest. Both face significant opposition from Indigenous leaders. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
After the break, Rosie is here with At Issue.
Hey, Erica, tonight's last at issue before the summer, we're going to talk about the Liberals' legislative agenda, including that bill to approve nation-building projects.
This legislation is enabling legislation. It creates the possibility of these projects.
So what does this say about the government's priorities? Has there been enough consultation? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
Hurricane Erick slammed into Mexico's southern Pacific coast earlier today as a Category 3 storm. Sustained winds hit 205 kilometers an hour. While the storm weakened as it moved inland, it still left behind a trail of destruction, including swamped fishing boats and beaches littered with debris, along with damaged roads and highways. Canada's Competition Bureau says it has a way to slash the high cost of air travel within the country by allowing foreign companies to play a greater role. Anis Hedari now on the plan and the pushback.
Canadians pay higher fares when they fly within this country because there aren't more airlines fighting for their dollars. So says Canada's Competition Bureau in a new report.
A single new airline entrant on a given route in Canada would on average lead to price decreases of 9%. So this is very significant.
The Bureau studied the airline industry for a year, confirming domestic air travel is dominated by two companies. In 2023, Air Canada carried more than 34% of passengers. WestJet, more than 30%. No other airlines broke through 10%, and the Bureau has a suggestion to fix that.
For Canada to have robust competition in the airline sector, we have to be open to foreign sources of capital.
But foreign investors can have different objectives than Canadians.
It's not free money. And, those carriers that that invest in Canadian carriers will exact a price. Well, there's a price to pay for that investment.
Plus, international airlines may not be interested in many Canadian cities.
Airlines in places like the US are pulling out of routes that are much larger than the routes in Canada that need to be served, so we just don't think that'll work.
As well, airport taxes, surcharges, and fees don't just drive up ticket prices. The research showed they are a major challenge for possible competitors.
Right now, the way we fund airports and the air travel system really does make it harder for smaller and more discount players to compete.
This is just research. Any action is up to the federal government. The Transportation Ministry said it's reviewing the report. As for the big airlines, their national lobby group says adding foreign competition won't reduce prices and that fees should be lowered. Anis Heydari, CBC News, Toronto.
Now let's dig deeper into the news shaping our world. It's Thursday, so Rosie's here with At Issue.
At issue tonight, Mark Carney's legislative agenda. The Liberals are pushing through a major bill to speed up nation-building projects.
This legislation is enabling legislation. It creates the possibility of these projects.
Some Indigenous communities are voicing their concerns to the PM.
He needs to live up to his obligations, the treaty obligations and the constitutional obligation that he has.
But the Prime Minister says consultation will happen.
At its heart, consultation, full consultation with Indigenous peoples to define what is a nation-building project.
So what's been made of how quickly this legislation is being passed? What does this tell us about the Carney government's approach? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, good to see all of you. Althea, I was teasing you because you've written on this a couple of times, so I'm going to start with you. What do you think is behind the speed at which the Prime Minister is pushing this legislation through? And I guess what is your biggest concern?
Well, I think they want to have a big win before Canada Day. I think they want to free themselves from some of the laws that they feel currently impede their ability to greenlight projects fast. What concerns me is that this is legislation. It's not just enabling legislation. Some of the concerns that Indigenous groups that you just aired have could easily be fixed by making consultation very clear and obligatory in the factors the government must consider, because it just says at the moment, may consider. Some of the language could be tightened up to make the bill a lot less vague, and that would go a long way to quell some of the concerns. My concern is the precedent that it creates. This bill basically says that Cabinet can decide to just omit certain laws from consideration from applying. So this is basically, as one senator put it to me, trust me legislation. The government is saying, don't worry, because we're going to pass this law and we're going to enact it properly and your concerns are going to be allayed. Don't worry about it. But we are creating a framework that allows any government, it could be this government, it could be a future government, to just bypass the will of Parliament, to bypass laws that have been debated, in some cases over several years and passed, and to vest the power in one individual to say, these are the conditions or zero conditions I'm going to place on one project is rather insane, frankly. Like, imagine the corruption that could potentially be enabled by legislation like this. Like, it is so problematic that it deserves more than a few days, 2 days of study. It could easily sit through next week, the House, or the week after, so that the Senate can consider their amendments and have them approved by the House. There is no need to rush this because these projects are still going to take years to build. So taking the summer to get this right, it makes you wonder what is the rush? What does the government not want us to see?
Right, and we are expecting this to pass on Friday, at least inside the House. I would also just point out that the legislation does have a sunset clause of 5 years.
5 years, because the government decided not to adopt the Green Party's amendment of 2 years.
Okay, Chantal, what are your thoughts about what Althea is saying there, about some of the concerns that people have raised?
I do think that in a new parliament, more time could have been given to debating this bill without anything happening to whatever projects the government has in mind. I believe that they are obsessed with this idea that this is a minority government, and at this point we are in a honeymoon period, so we need to get this done because it could get complicated. What if we have to present a budget? And people kind of start turning against us because they don't like the budget, and then this bill gets caught in this. I understand that. I also understand that there are amendments being put forward, and I'm curious to see what the end product will look like. But if the government really believes that passing this legislation in whatever shape or form by July 1st will end the conversation, it is just the beginning of a conversation. And yes, the government doesn't have enough confidence in itself to take the time to debate its bill, but civil society should have more confidence in itself to react to whatever is decided on the basis of that law.
Yeah, I think Althea is right, Andrew. There is a trust me piece of this, certainly, but there is also opportunity for projects to not go ahead, either because the conditions are too heavy for the proponent or because, as Chantal points out, people protest and it becomes very, very complicated for the government moving forward.
Yeah, I think they've managed to annoy both the left and the right on this. So on the one hand, progressives can be upset, and rightly so, that a single minister can basically waive laws passed by Parliament that were presumably passed with good reason, and if not, they should change the laws. But also people on the right, at least principled conservatives, which apparently doesn't include the Conservative Party of Canada, would be upset by the huge discretion given to a single minister to basically pick winners, the potential for cronyism, certainly the departure from any kind of even-hand market approach to things. I think there's a large body of opinion that would say we need to do something to speed up the approvals process for these things. Some of these legislation are probably too onerous, have too many requirements, et cetera. Fine, let's do the hard work of fixing that process generally for all projects, not giving a favored few a kind of a fast track in based on criteria that who knows what. I mean, you can set out the broad criterion in the legislation, but it's up to the minister basically to decide how and when they're going to be applied. That's different than having Parliament pass a law saying this specific project is going to go ahead because we've decided in a transparent way that it meets certain tests. So it's assigning a huge amount of discretion to one minister. On top of which, it's not just C5. There's 3 bills now that the government's put forward, and they have several things in common. One is they're all omnibus bill. They yoke together vastly different types of legislation and demand Parliament pass them at one go. Secondly, they often involve, in a couple of cases, violations of privacy rights or individual rights that the government seems quite high-handed and unconcerned about. And thirdly, they involve trampling on the rights of Parliament. This is right. Henry VIII legislation is this kind of thing. Henry C5 is called. Basically is empowering cabinet to just ignore Parliament. That's not what our system is supposed to be about.
But the only piece of legislation that's likely going to get passed is C5. And to be fair to conservatives, I have heard conservatives make those exact points that you made off the top. Althea?
No, I think C2 and C4, the Budget Implementation Act, which has some of the privacy requirements that, or lack of privacy requirements rather, that Andrew was talking about, will get passed. I do think the government doesn't really care because they're riding so high in public opinion polls and they're not worried about it, and it's the summer and Canadians are not paying attention. But what's really kind of troublesome about this is, if the Conservatives introduced bills like this, the Liberals would be up in arms and protesting. And so it's really hypocritical. And frankly, they're boxing themselves in a corner. Like, this is the government that came in 2015 and said that they were all about evidence-based decision-making. And what business wants is clear, predictable, transparent rules so they know what the process is, they know what the timelines are going to be. This legislation, C5, is not that. And I will say that it's not just the business community that wants to see clarity. It's also environmental groups that want to see projects done faster, because if we're going to meet our net zero by 2050, we need to get moving on the things that can get us there. So those big projects do actually need to get done a lot faster.
Chantal?
I don't think this is the 2015 government, so up to
it's definitely not.
No. So I also believe that a lot of the groups who are getting ready to fight understand that this will be easier to fight. You're not going to get public opinion riled up on the day after an election, where most people are happy with the result, on a legislative text. So the strategy to go is to wait for the projects to have a name and a face. That's where you draw the line. You don't draw it, and I totally agree about process going too quickly. Yeah. But what that builds to is the consensus you have. You are undermining by going too quickly. And at some point, there will be a price to pay for that. But that price will not be paid today.
Last 30
seconds. It will be paid tomorrow.
Yeah. Last 30 seconds to you, Andrew, because the government's also taking advantage of a feeling that Canada needs to do more because of Donald Trump, obviously, too.
Yeah, well, vibes-based legislation is not necessarily the best basis for, passing sound laws. Neither am I particularly comfortable with the idea that we'll decide which projects go ahead based on which arouses the most, opposition in the streets. You would hope that it would be based on what is the cost and benefit of the legislation of the project for the country and for the national interest. If the Conservatives had brought forward legislation like any of this, C2, C4, or C5, the Liberals would quite properly be screaming blue murder. But here they are in power trying to court right-of-center voters, and they've only got the Conservatives saying in some cases, go ahead, like on the major projects, on the bill in C4 to remove the federal political parties from any scrutiny on privacy, whether federal or provincial. The Conservatives are also saying yea or nay, ready on that. It's not Parliament's finest hour.
But this is the Parliament that Canadians chose, right? And so this is what they're facing now. Okay, we're gonna leave this part here. When we come back, we'll take a look at the events from the G7 this week.
As chair, I focused on strengthening international partnerships with leading nations around the table.
What progress was made with other countries as Canada seeks partners beyond the United States? What could it mean for the NATO summit next week? That's next. At issue, Canada's role in the world. The G7 summit ended without a trade deal between Canada and the U.S., but improved relationships with other partners, including India.
An agreement to provide the necessary foundations to begin to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect, sovereignty, trust.
At the NATO summit next week, Canada has committed to increased defense spending and a new defense partnership with Europe.
Canada is stepping up to meet our commitments and look forward to defining those new responsibilities and capabilities.
So is the G7 a success for Canada? What do new dynamics with allies mean for Canada's role in the world? For the NATO summit next week, Chantal, Andrew, and Althea are back. Chantal, obviously the NATO summit next week is different because Canada now says, well, we're going to meet the 2% GDP of defense spending, and we might be able to go higher if we include other things. Between what happened this week and next week, what are you taking away from this government's approach to Canada's place in the world?
Well, first on Canada-US issues, I'm taking away that it was Canada that built expectations of a deal at the G7. That did not pan out. And I'm still waiting for some sense from the US that this 38 days accelerated deadline is actually real because, yes, Canada says we agreed to something, and I have seen no evidence of it. So why would you raise expectations if you didn't get what you want? Probably because things didn't go as you wanted. The restoration of a relationship, if you want to call it that, with India, I think Mark Carney is up to a point busy erasing as many red lines from the previous government as he can while he's still in his honeymoon phase. Defense spending, Canada needs to show up there with more of a percentage. Why? Because there's going to be a fight over raising it to 5%, and it needs allies. Spain came up today as an ally, because we're not going to get to 5%, not unless we run, I don't know. I'm curious to see a budget.
Andrew, what does all this tell you about the way this Prime Minister is approaching the world, though? Both how he handled the G7 and then how he's going into this next meeting next week.
Well, it's rather like those three pieces of legislation we were talking about. He is a fan of expedience. He's in his former life was not greatly encumbered by the obligation to respect individual rights or Parliament's prerogatives, and now it's Canadian values and interests. It's fine to say, oh, we're going to engage in real politics. We're going to strike a new arrangement with India. Okay, what was the conditions, or were there any conditions attached to that? Do we have any undertakings from India that they're going to behave better, they're going to stop interfering in our elections, they're going to stop murdering our citizens? Or was it just, we're going to let bygones be bygones and simply look forward? That would be one thing I would like to know more about. This agreement on the trade thing is not an agreement at all. We're going to seek to strike a deal. 30 days was, I think, just pulled out of thin air. There's certainly no indication that the Americans gave anything in return for that. Look, he's in a difficult position. we're cornered. We're alone in many respects. We're having to sort of forge new relationships on the fly. Getting the defense spending up to 2% of GDP, although we really don't know what that's involved either. The parliamentary budget officer was complaining that there's no details on that, but it's certainly a starting point. But we're going to have to, he's kind of, designing the plane while flying it. He's trying to create a new role for Canada in the world that's more independent of the United States without completely letting go of the U.S. connection before we're sure of what we're doing with the Europeans, for example, on defense.
Yeah, because we're also expecting him to announce this that Canada will be part of this Rearm Europe deal next week as well. Althea.
The Bloc Québécois leader described Mark Carney this weekend, actually has been for several weeks, as the CEO of Canada. And I think when you look at that through that frame, some of the stuff that Andrew's talking about, for example, the disregard for Parliament kind of fits in that. Some people around the cabinet table are wondering if their role is just to rubber stamp things or if this is really a group decision-making body. I think that number one thing is the commercial relationship. And you see that because the entire rhetoric of the campaign, the elbows up, we're taking the fight to Donald Trump, disappeared. After the election was over, the Prime Minister is very complimentary to the President, who obviously loves that, for commercial reasons, because he thinks that sucking up to Donald Trump will get us the best deal. I think the Canadian government assumed that there was going to be movement, and that's why we did not see counter tariffs and movements, and that's why we saw the news that we had today. On the defense part, again, you can see it through a commercial relationship. You talk to cabinet ministers, and the future that the Carney government imagines is one where we could be a major defense supplier, and that could be a huge spur for economic growth in this country. And so our repartnering with Europe or joining Rearm Europe is about enabling Canadian companies to do that. And the same thing with the relationship with India. And the problem is, I think at some point, some of the commercial interests will butt with political interests, and there will be tension there.
Last 30 seconds to you, Chantal.
Yeah, well, Mark Carney managed to lead an entire G7, G6 summit without the words climate being mentioned. That's quite something, and without any communique on Ukraine. That kind of tells you everything you need to know. Donald Trump wasn't even there, and that didn't happen.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for At Issue on The National. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to talk about how Pierre Poilievre is moving on from his election loss. We should tell you this is also the last At Issue. We're going to take a little break for the summer. You can always catch us on YouTube or the At Issue podcast. Now back to Erica in Vancouver.
Thanks, Rosie. Up next, a SpaceX Starship test takes a fiery turn.
Just the sight was literally something I could hardly believe I was seeing with my own eyes.
The point of view from an eyewitness in our moment. A dramatic scene out of Texas late last night where a SpaceX Starship exploded during a routine test. Not far away, Andrew Clifford was watching on, and he caught the whole thing on camera. Tonight, his first-hand account makes our moment.
And just the sight was literally something I could hardly believe I was seeing with my own eyes. This was supposed to be a test of the engines of this ship, which will hopefully eventually allow humans to go to Mars on one of these rockets. It felt like slow motion to me. It was like this explosion that's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at that point, I was just like, this is unreal. I was like, this shouldn't be happening.
Oh my goodness.
It wasn't until, a few seconds later, then the sound hit. And I do remember being able to feel the heat from the explosion as well. I think the first thing was just like, am I safe? All right, I'm not in immediate danger, which they're really good about keeping people out of like the actual danger area. I had an adrenaline rush for hours. It was like, this is the craziest thing ever.
Crazy, but apparently safe for onlookers. SpaceX says a safety zone around the site was maintained at all times and all personnel are safe and accounted for. As for Elon Musk, he had something to say. He posted on X, just a scratch. Thanks for being with us tonight. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Erica Johnson in Vancouver. Take care.